Hey, how's it going? In this video, we're going to use curl and awk to scrape a specific website. In this case here, it's going to be PagerDuty's support page. Now, it doesn't really matter what site it is. Same tactics can be used here. But on this site here, there is a date that is output here inside of a list here, a li element, where it just gives us the latest vCard update. Now, if you're not familiar with what a vCard is or PagerDuty, it's not really super important, but PagerDuty lets you get notified of certain events. For example, the place that I work at, we use PagerDuty to get notified if there is critical downtime. So if the site goes down, then I get notified on my phone. And the thing is, PagerDuty is a pretty big service. They have hundreds of different numbers that they can call you from. Of course, you can bypass all this and just install their app. But you know what? I didn't want to install the app on my phone because I don't want something draining my battery. I just want to get called if there's critical downtime, which really only happens, hopefully, like once or twice a year or something like that. But long story short, PagerDuty has, this pool of phone numbers and it's constantly getting updated. There might be hundreds of them. And you know how it is, right? If it's the middle of the night or whatever, I turn my phone on to D&D mode so I don't get disturbed. However, I want to favorite that in my contacts app there so that PagerDuty actually gets notified through D&D mode. So I actually wake up there to handle a downtime event. But yeah, the idea here is, every once in a while, maybe a couple of times a year, PagerDuty will update their site here, and they let you know by putting the date here, and then you can download this on your phone, import it into your contact app, and then you can have one single contact, let's say PagerDuty, you can favorite, start, whatever you're using for Android or iOS, and then you are good to go here to remain up to date. So what I wanted to do here was basically create a little alias that I just manually run, every Friday, basically once a week, and it just goes and checks the date here and outputs that. For example, if I jump over to the terminal and I run something like, PagerDuty vCard, that's how I have the alias set up here. It just returns the last date that this file was updated. You can see here, it matches the date here. And again, it might just update a couple of times a year. It really depends here. The file here, if you look in the bottom left there, it's hosted on S3 here. Yeah, we're not dealing with downloading the file and doing anything with it. We are just checking the website here. And we're actually going to go over a more robust way to do this one, but we're not going to implement it, but we will check it out if you want. But with that said, let's go over this alias here so we can see how things work. So, we can take a look at it just doing type, PD vCard if you wanted to like this, but this might be a little bit hard to read, no syntax highlighting. So let me just go to .fried rice here to my aliases here. It's going to be a local alias that I have set up. It doesn't really matter where it is for the sake of this. We can ignore this error from shell check here. It's a false positive. But in any case here, here's basically what's happening. We are using curl to basically curl down, that site that we just looked at. That's going to give us the HTML response there. And then we're going to be using awk here to basically parse out that HTML and give us the response that we want. So let me open up another terminal here just so we can see this thing gets pieced together here because, there is a lot of moving parts. So if we just curl that, that's the entire HTML response here. And, somewhere buried in there is a list element, an li. And if we go back to the website here, if we go and inspect this element here and go and check it out, we can see that there is an li here and there is a date right there. And that's nice. And the HTML happens to be minified, so there's no new lines, which makes it even easier to deal with this with awk. So, going from there, you're like, okay, cool. Like we can just pipe that into awk, and then we can use the match function that comes with awk here. And that takes 3 parameters, basically. One, match is going to go line by line by line by line, splitting on new lines of the output that it receives. In this case, it's going to be, the HTML there. And this $0, the reason I escaped it here in the alias, like this is not like an argument being passed in to the shell script or something like that. This is part of matches syntax here. This is going to be the current line of output. The second argument passed in is going to be a regular expression that you want to search for. And the last argument here is an array that is going to contain, whatever matches that you might have here. And then finally, if there is a match, then it is going to print things out. Now, there's a lot going on here. Let's break this down and kind of just run this a little bit and see some of the outputs that we would get. So let me just grab the whole entire thing here just so we can run it and see the same output as the alias. Looks like I might have missed something. What happened here? Backslash, then ls. Oh, you know what? Since it's not in an alias now, then we don't need to escape that $sign there. There we go. So let me just rerun this one, maybe make this a little bit bigger, just so we have a little bit more room, I guess, I suppose. But yeah, you can see right here, it outputs a date, which is exactly what we want. Now, this array here that has 1 here, if we were to do 0, this is going to get the match group, the entire match group here, whereas 1 is just going to get the value of that match group. And, going back to what the heck is a match group, what's going on here. So maybe we can break down this regular expression just a little bit here, right? What we see here basically in the middle. And yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. Basically, this is looking for all li tags here, even if they have some attributes in there. For example, not valid shell syntax, but if you had like, class equals hello or something like this, then, we want to capture potentially what's in there as well. But, even if there's no attribute there, like no class or whatever, we also want to capture that too. So that's basically, this part here, actually up to here, right, for the closing of the li as well. But then after that, we also have this check here to see if there's 0 or more spaces, because, maybe their HTML gets formatted later in such a way where you have something like the date here, right? And there's like a space over here. So we want to handle that, just to be a little bit more robust. We don't necessarily need to do that, but it's kind of nice just to have in a script there. It doesn't really add that much more complexity. And then here inside the parentheses, we have the capture group. So in this case here, we just have a regex to be like, okay, we want to have like 0 to 9, 4 digits there, dash, and then 2, and then dash 2. And basically that gives us the format of year, month, day, day. In this case here, the output there is year, month, day, day with the dashes in the middle. So of course, if PagerDuty decides to change the formatting of the HTML there, then we would need to go back and adjust this. But yeah, we'll go over how we can maybe make this a little bit more robust in the future here. But that's basically a breakdown of what's happening here. And, we are exiting explicitly here in the script because we only care about the first match. In your case, maybe your page is a little bit different here. Maybe you want to get the last match or something like that. So you wouldn't exit here, and then you would modify some of the awk things to, get the last match instead of just getting the match here and then exiting out. But yeah, that's basically how things are broken down here. Again, if we use this 0 here, then that's going to give you the li as well as the date as well. But in this case here, we just care about the date. Now, if you had a second set of capture groups, so maybe you have another set of parentheses in there, then you can access that with a and then 2. So that would be like the next element in the array, right? Instead of 1, then you would use 2. For example, we don't have that here, but there's 1, and then in this case here 2, there's nothing there, so it's not going to output anything. But yeah, that's really the basics here, right? All wrapped into a little alias here that we can run. It takes me 5 seconds, but there are some downsides to this, right? You can imagine, let's say you have a bigger team. Maybe there's 3 people on your team or 5 people on your team that need to get notified. That means every single person on your team needs to kind of maybe run this, or maybe somebody runs it and then they send a Slack message to be like, hey, by the way, it's been updated, go and update your vCard or something like that. Also, this runs the risk of, things changing behind the scenes. Maybe this, just happens to have the HTML in a totally different way in the future. Suddenly this all breaks and now it's like you have to rewrite all of this. So you could make this quite a bit more robust. So if I go to the blog post version of this one here, we kind of went over all the different things that was here. If you ever want to go and check out more details here, I wrote all this stuff out so you can go and check it out later. Now, as for making this more robust here, the above is a quick win, right? I run it about once a week here, takes less than 5 seconds of time, not a big deal at all. Also, PagerDuty doesn't really add numbers all that often, maybe a couple times a year, but again, it really depends here. But the really nice things about the approach that we just did is very easy to hack together here. It doesn't really depend on anything like a web service running. There's no scheduled tasks like cron jobs or systemd timers. There's no databases or state files or anything like that. But yeah, it requires you doing a manual task here, and we kind of went over that, right? If they change their markup, they need to adjust the regex. You'll always know if it's been adjusted and it breaks though, because when you run it, it's just going to fail or not match anything, and then you need to take an action there. But yeah, we can totally make this script better, and we're not going to do it in this video here because I just haven't done it personally. But here's what I would do to make this a lot more robust and maybe more scalable, right? So what we could do is kind of just download that vCard file straight from PagerDuty every single day in a temp directory, right? This could be running in a daily cron job or a systemd timer. Doesn't really matter, because right here you can see it's hosted on S3 there in the bottom left here. That's the file itself. Okay, cool. So we can just grab that every single day, download it to a temp file over here, and then we can get the checksum of the file, right? MD5 checksum or whatever it happens to be. And the idea there is, the intent. Later on, we're going to see what happens here, but we could save that to maybe a local state file here. Again, we could choose whatever path or file that we want. We don't want it in the temp directory here because if you reboot, likely on a Linux system there, then you're going to lose the contents of the temp directory. So, we'll save it out somewhere reasonable here, and that will just store the checksum. So in this case here, the checksum would be, basically the value of the file rolled up into a little hash. And the nice idea there is, you can have this little string saved to a single file here, and let's say that you download this a couple of days from now, a week from now, a month from now, whatever it is, and the contents of this file changes, then the checksum of that value is going to be different here. So we would end up with a different content in this file. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. But yeah, step 3 would be like, okay, well, maybe it's the first run or whatever, the file doesn't exist, then I will write the file out. But if the file does exist, maybe it's the second time it's ever run or whatever, is it the same value as step 2's checksum? So is today's checksum the same as one from before, then we know it didn't change. So there's basically, nothing that we need to do. If we had this little script here doing all the steps here, it can just exit and do nothing. However, if it did change, then we know like, okay, cool, like today's checksum, maybe 3 weeks in the future or something changed. So we know that the value of the vCard was changed. So we know we have an update to do here. So now it can actually overwrite that state file over here. And then it's really up to you, right? Maybe you can send a Slack notification, maybe you can send an email out, it really, really depends here. And, as for that MD5 hash here, you can go and just very quickly take a look here at something. So whatever, do I have any files in my home directory? Yeah, whatever, this wget hsts1 file. So we have this wget file here. I guess I can just cat it out just like this, wget, and then we could see whatever is in there. Okay, that's, it doesn't really matter what the content of this is, but if we were to run something like an MD5 hash on here, what's the file? Oh, MD5 sum, that's what it is. We run that, and then it's like, boom, there is the MD5 hash here. You could just cut out the first column, something like that, right? It would be pretty easy to do. We could do here, the delimiter is going to be a space, and then, yeah, we can do that, and then there it is, right? So this would be the value that you would be saving to that file. And then, yeah, that's the one we'd be comparing. So that's really it, right? The nice thing about this one is if you have multiple people that need to get notified, then maybe you have an email alias that gets sent to, maybe it goes to a Slack channel that everybody can see. It doesn't really depend on scraping anything. So all that complex awk script goes away here because, again, we're just doing, an MD5 checksum there on the file, and we're good to go. So yeah, with that said, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer all of them. And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Really does help a lot. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next one.